There are legends, and then there are secrets, buried in garages, wrapped in tarp, too wild for the showroom and too personal for the press. This is the story of one of those secrets. It's not the Cobra, not the GT350, not even the Daytona Coupe. It's something else. Something no one was supposed to see. After Carroll Shelby passed in 2012, the world mourned the loss of a racing icon. But deep in Texas, on a piece of land not listed on any map, his estate discovered something that would shake the foundations of car history. A car with no name, no VIN, no official record, just a tag on the steering wheel that said, EXP Shelby, do not move. What was it? Why was it hidden? And what does it tell us about the man who changed American performance forever? This isn't just a story about horsepower or history. It's about rebellion, about defying the rules even after the world said you were done, because Carroll Shelby didn't just leave behind cars. He left behind a final challenge. One last wild creation, waiting in the dark. And now that it's been found, the real story begins. Before the headlines, the Le Mans trophies, or the screaming V8s, Carroll Shelby was just a kid from East Texas with a weak heart and a wild streak. Diagnosed with a serious heart condition as a young man, Shelby wasn't supposed to race. Doctors warned him, friends doubted him, but the rules never applied to Carroll Shelby. He started as a chicken farmer, no joke, but speed was his addiction. And soon he was clawing his way through dirt tracks and local circuits, earning a name not just for his driving, but for his will to win. He wasn't the most polished or the most funded, but he was fearless. By the 1950s, he was racing on the international stage. In 1959, he pulled off the unthinkable, winning Le Mans in an Aston Martin. But just when he reached the top, his heart gave out again, and he was forced to retire. But stepping away from... The wheel didn't mean stepping away from racing. For Shelby, it was just the beginning. He had a new vision. He saw the raw power of American muscle and the nimble precision of European design and asked, what if you didn't have to choose? That question became the Shelby Cobra. It was more than a car. It was a middle finger to the establishment. With its brutal acceleration and unapologetic design, it smoked Ferraris and made the old guard nervous. Shelby was no longer just a driver. He was a builder, a leader, a force. But even as he partnered with giants like Ford to build the GT350 and later the GT40, Shelby never lost his outsider spirit. He argued in boardrooms. He fought for horsepower when others pushed for safety. He believed in going faster, not in fitting in, and that's what defined him. Not the cars, the courage, the refusal to accept limits. Carroll Shelby didn't belong in a lab or an office. He belonged in a garage, with a wrench in hand, chasing the impossible. Because for him, the goal was never perfection. It was passion. It was war. And the battlefield was always under the hood. For years, there were whispers, quiet stories passed between die-hard collectors and retired engineers. They spoke of a car that didn't appear in any Shelby American registry. No public prototype, no production plans, no SEMA debut. Just rumors. Some said it was a wild concept that never made it past a sketch. Others believed it was a hoax, a fantasy born from Shelby's larger-than-life legacy. But the most persistent voices, the ones who had worked alongside Carroll, hinted at something more. They remembered late nights in the late 90s when Shelby was supposed to be slowing down. He was consulting, advising, speaking at events. But there were gaps in his schedule, long stretches when no one knew exactly where he was or what he was doing. Occasionally, a fabricator would mention getting an odd call. No details, just show up after dark. A mechanic friend remembered Shelby driving a beat-up truck loaded with prototype parts, eyes gleaming like he was 20 years younger. But nothing was ever confirmed. There were no photos, no documents, no blueprints. Whatever Shelby was working on, he was keeping it quiet. even from those closest to him. And that's what made the rumors so persistent, because if anyone could pull off a secret build, it was Carroll Shelby. He had the connections, the resources, and most importantly, the obsession. He was never just building cars for the market. He was building to scratch an itch, to test an idea, to chase an edge no one else could see. Some insiders even claimed he joked about it. He'd say, "One day I'll build something they can't dilute. No emissions, no airbags, no rules." To most, it sounded like classic Shelby bravado. But now, looking back, maybe it wasn't a joke at all. Maybe it was a warning or a promise. Because long before anyone pulled back a dusty tarp in a forgotten Texas garage, the myth had already taken root. A myth about one last machine, one final act of rebellion. And while no one could prove it existed, the idea refused to die. Because legends like Shelby don't just leave behind cars, they leave behind echoes. In the years following Carroll Shelby's death, his estate faced the enormous task of cataloging his legacy. Dozens of rare cars, stacks of blueprints, shelves of memorabilia, and garages filled with parts and projects spanning decades. Every item had a story, every artifact, a chapter in automotive history. But then came the garage no one expected. It wasn't on any public record. It didn't appear in any of Shelby American's inventories. It wasn't even known to many close friends. It sat quietly on private land in rural Texas, a low, unmarked metal building behind a chain-link fence shrouded by trees and time. When the estate team arrived, the place felt frozen. Dust coated everything. The air was stale. Tools sat untouched on benches. It was like a scene paused mid-chapter, waiting to be resumed. In the center of the garage, under a large gray canvas, was something long and low. They thought it was a spare chassis or maybe an unfinished project, but when they pulled back the tarp, everything changed. Beneath the cover was a car that didn't resemble anything in the known Shelby catalog. It wasn't a Cobra. It wasn't a Mustang. It was something else entirely, low-slung, wide, and aggressive, with hand-formed aluminum panels and exaggerated aerodynamics. There was no VIN, no manufacturer's plate, no Shelby badge. Just a wrinkled paper tag tied to the steering column that read, XP Shelby, do not move. The wheels were coated in dust, but the tires were new. The engine bay was tightly packed with a twin-turbo V8, something Shelby had hinted at in interviews but never brought to market. A unique rear-mounted cooling system and custom transmission setup made it even stranger. Handwritten notes were scrawled on various parts in marker, twin test rack only, Shelby EXP V8, and most chilling of all, on the firewall, not for production. Everything about the car screamed prototype, but not the kind built for approval. This was a car built in secrecy. Not for a boardroom, not for a crowd, but for one man's vision. Experts were called in, engineers, designers, even former Shelby team members. They confirmed what the estate suspected. This wasn't just a one-off. This was something Shelby had poured himself into. No paperwork, no press release, no explanation. Just raw intent, frozen in metal. What they had uncovered wasn't just a car. It was a ghost, a message, a question Shelby never got to ask out loud. And now, the world had to answer it. The first thing that stood out about the mysterious prototype was how deliberately different it was. This wasn't a tweak of a known model or a styling exercise meant for a concept show. It was radical. It was Shelby unleashed. The body was sculpted, almost alien in form. Wide haunches, flared fenders, an aggressively sloped roofline. All of it handmade in aluminum. There were no molds, no duplicated parts. Each panel was hammered, shaped, and fitted by hand. The proportions didn't match any production car, not even the most exotic Shelby builds. Then there was the chassis, heavily modified from a Fox body Mustang, but only in the loosest sense. The frame was stretched and stiffened. The suspension points were unrecognizable. Whatever this car was, it was built to test extremes. Under the hood, the surprises deepened. The engine was a twin-turbocharged V8, likely a variation of Ford's modular platform, but it had been reworked beyond recognition. Oversized turbos, a custom intake system, massive intercoolers, and a rear-mounted radiator system unlike anything used in Shelby projects before. The entire powertrain layout had been reversed. A custom transmission setup routed power in ways engineers couldn't initially make sense of. There were cooling channels that looked more like aircraft engineering than automotive design, and none of it was documented. No CAD files, no testing data, just crude handwritten instructions and part codes in marker ink. Some pieces were labeled Shelby EXP V8, others had vague notations like not for track, test only, or do not replicate. On the firewall, a phrase stood out in block letters, not for production. Inside, the car was stripped down, bare metal, no trim, no sound deadening, a racing bucket seat, analog gauges, exposed wiring. Every ounce of it was built for function, over form. And yet, it had an eerie beauty, like a prototype that had escaped the lab before being tamed. Some speculated it was a testbed for a new generation Shelby supercar, one that was never greenlit. Others believed it was a personal experiment, something Shelby wanted to prove to himself more than to the public. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a car built for shows or sales. It was built to chase a question. What if you removed all limits? No rules, no safety nets, just performance in its rawest, purest form. And in that way, it was the most Shelby thing ever created. Every part of the car told a story, and none of those stories were in the official record. That's because this prototype wasn't a company project. It wasn't funded by Ford or designed by a team. It was built in the shadows, under the radar, and against every rule of the modern automotive world. According to former Shelby American fabricators, this wasn't just a secret, it was a vow. Shelby had grown tired of boardroom compromises, EPA forms, and the corporate obsession with mass appeal. He wanted to build one last car that answered to no one, so he did. Multiple insiders confirmed, off the record, that Shelby gathered a skeleton crew in the late 90s and early 2000s. These weren't interns or junior techs. These were veterans, trusted mechanics, fabricators, and engineers who had worked with him for years. Shelby handpicked them, not because they were cheap, because they were loyal. Work happened after hours. No time cards, no memos. A few parts were sourced from discontinued Ford test programs. Others were custom-built in private machine shops. One source claimed Shelby even paid for components out of pocket to keep the paper trail cold. They called it the Ghost. No one spoke about it in public, not even around other Shelby employees. One fabricator recalled being told, "You didn't see it. You weren't here." Shelby would show up late at night with sketches, parts, ideas. He'd run his hands along a fender, inspect a weld, or make changes on the fly. He wasn't playing the role of visionary. He was in the trenches, sleeves rolled up, breathing the same fumes as his crew. He told them, "This one's just for us," and they believed him. Because what they were building wasn't for investors or customers. It was a love letter to the raw spirit of performance, a rejection of safety sheets and sales forecasts. It was pure Shelby, brutal, brilliant, and defiantly real. To this day, most who worked on it refused to go on record. Some fear lawsuits, others simply respect the code they kept with Shelby. But they all agree on one thing. It was the last time they saw him truly alive. And that, more than anything, tells you what this car really meant. After the car was discovered, the next question was painfully obvious. What now? Some in Shelby's circle wanted it displayed, polished, photographed, and placed front and center in the Shelby Heritage Center in Las Vegas. Others disagreed. They believed it should stay as it was found, dusty, raw, untouched, like a sealed letter from the past. Then there were the legal problems. Because the prototype wasn't in any official registry, no one could prove who exactly owned it. It wasn't street legal. It didn't meet emissions standards. It had no VIN, no crash data, and likely violated dozens of federal regulations. If it ever hit a public road or auction block, Ford's legal team could intervene, maybe even confiscate it. And if it was built using Ford property or under Shelby's name, the intellectual property alone could spark a courtroom war. That's before you even touch questions of insurance, liability, and public safety. In essence, it was a car that wasn't supposed to exist, and that made it legally radioactive. But beyond the technicalities, there was a deeper question. What did Shelby want? There's no note, no letter, no video where he spells it out. All we have is the car itself and the intent welded into every inch of it. And that's where the divide begins. One camp argues that the car deserves to be restored and shared with the world. They say keeping it hidden goes against what Shelby stood for, pushing boundaries, inspiring builders, showing what's possible. But another group says this car was personal. It wasn't built for glory, it was built for expression. And putting it on display turns rebellion into spectacle. It turns a roar into a ringtone. Some even call it Shelby's black file car. The kind of top-secret project never meant for public consumption. A symbol, not a product. And so the debate continues. Preserve it, restore it, display it, or let it stay in the shadows where it was born. Because no matter what happens next, one truth remains. This car was never meant to be understood by everyone. It was meant to remind us that the wildest ideas don't always fit inside the frame. Sometimes they break it. This car isn't just a prototype, it's a declaration. Every unfinished weld, every unpainted panel, every scribbled note in marker, it all speaks to one thing: freedom. Not the kind sold in brochures or packaged with leather seats, but the kind found under flickering lights in a quiet garage. The kind you build with your hands. Shelby didn't need approval. He didn't ask permission. He didn't chase trends. He followed instinct. And in that instinct was a message, forged in aluminum and oil, that innovation isn't about compliance. It's about courage. This prototype wasn't built for investors or magazine covers. It was built because Shelby still had something to say. Even if the world had stopped listening, he knew what was coming. Regulation, digitization, control. And in the face of all that, he built something wild, unapologetic, unrepeatable. This car isn't just Shelby's final machine, it's his final argument. So here we are, staring at a car that was never meant to be found, never meant to be seen, and maybe never meant to be understood. But now that it's here, we can't ignore what it represents. It's not just metal and horsepower. It's a relic of rebellion. A rolling reminder that true greatness isn't measured by sales figures or lap times. It's measured by the guts it takes to chase something no one else sees. In a world that now designs cars with algorithms and releases them through press kits, this prototype whispers something louder than any engine roar. That passion still matters. That instinct still matters. And that somewhere in a forgotten garage, the next legend might already be taking shape. Carroll Shelby left behind more than blueprints and badges. He left behind a challenge. To every builder, dreamer, and rebel out there, don't wait for permission. Build what scares you. Build what excites you. Build what they say you can't, because that's how legends are born. If this story moved you, subscribe for more, because these aren't just car stories. These are human stories, and we're just getting started.